Ayubowan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, and a very warm welcome this pleasant afternoon here in Colombo. AmCham Sri Lanka has been recognized for over 3 decades as the forum for facilitation and development of trade, investment, and business relations between Sri Lanka and the United States. And throughout its 30 years of operation in Sri Lanka, AmCham has contributed immeasurably to the Sri Lankan business environment, through its activities. And as the need of the hour in providing impetus to the recovery and sustained growth of the national economy looms as a priority, we are once more pleased to be your partner in navigating these stormy waters of ever-changing business environments. And so, on behalf of the Resilient Sri Lanka team, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this, the first in a series of virtual engagements that form part of the Resilient Sri Lanka's ongoing project to research and resolve the challenges related to supply chain resilience that are faced by our various sectors, starting with the apparel industry. As you may be aware, Resilient Sri Lanka launched about 8 weeks ago with an in-person event titled De-Risking Sri Lankan Apparel, which combined the insights and expertise of multiple panel discussions and LQAs with industry professionals. And its resounding success served to make it very clear to us just how significant a topic this is. Hence, of course, this rollout of the next phase. We have an incredible lineup of speakers who view the challenges of this VUCA world with a fresh perspective. And we have an incredible moderator to guide you through this conversation this evening. So rather than take up more time, let me introduce your panel and hand you right over. Joining us today, we have Senpathi Jayavikrama, who is the Deputy General Manager Business Strategy at Maskrida. She has over 15 years of experience across multiple industries, social services, US healthcare, insurance, business process outsourcing, and apparel manufacturing, and is currently pursuing her interests in strategy development and execution as she heads the business strategy unit for Maskrida. Indrajit Gunathilaka is a supply chain manager at Hydramani, heading fabric procurement for the cluster while working on sourcing. With over 13 years of experience in the apparel industry, he has gained expertise in the function of sourcing and procurement, and Indrajit has become an expert in supply relations, ensuring strategic relationships are prioritized and transactional relationships are converted. Josiana Chokata is the head of procurement development and design at Trendsetters with a design degree from Italy. She specializes in working closely with clients to curate and develop seasonally new product ranges and working with suppliers to get the latest fabric, print, and embroidery techniques proudly showcasing to the world that Made in Sri Lanka sets the standard for high-quality products. Your moderator this evening, Anand Raman, is the founder and CEO of Kavida Technologies, a fulfillment workflow tool which helps procurement managers ensure on-time deliveries by managing all your fulfillment interactions. Having spent time working with early stage ventures and consulting for large corporates, Anand has first-hand experience of the tension between the pace of innovation and the challenges of adoption. Anand, it's over to you.
Thank you, Rai. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be moderating this discussion. As Rai mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kavida, and our core business is supply chain resilience, and it's a topic that I have personally been obsessed with for over 3 years. So that's why I'm delighted to be moderating this discussion, a much needed discussion in the Resilient Sri Lanka Forum. And the forum was really created to facilitate collaboration on this very complicated topic of resilience. It's a topic that no one company can solve by itself, and the reception has been brilliant so far. So providing a little bit of context as well, a little bit about me. I'm not actually Sri Lankan. I'm from London. I'm British-born Bangladeshi. And over the last 2 years, I've spent about 50% of my time in Sri Lanka. So I have this unique outsider perspective onto the industry here. And one thing that I've seen is that this industry was very much built by the industrialist generation who played the game under a different set of rules. And we're seeing the passing of the baton between that industrialist generation to this new technologist generation. The speakers today are the next leaders of the industry here. Their thinking is representative of where this industry is going in the island, and everything that they talk about, in my opinion, will inevitably become a reality because this is the generation that will occupy those senior roles. So the question is just how long? How long will it take for these ideas that are discussed today to materialize? So jumping into the conversation today, Sri Lanka has been a key sourcing destination for multiple award-winning brands, but its growth rate has been lagging behind competitors. On your screen right now is the compounding annual growth rate of apparel manufacturing in Asian countries in the prediction between 2022 to 26. Sri Lankan apparel is expected to grow at the second lowest rate in comparison to regional competitors. To kick things off, the first question is, why is Sri Lankan apparel lagging behind its competitors? And what are the biggest blockers to growth? To start the conversation, I would love Sympathy to jump in and give us her opinion.
All right. First of all, thank you very much, AmCham as well as Kavita for this great opportunity. I think it's a timely conversation, and I think it's great that we have the younger generation involved as well. So to start off with, I think to give a bit of a context as to Sri Lanka's apparel exports. As an industry, we account approximately close to about like 44% of the exports. And if you really look at the employment opportunities we create in the manufacturing sector, we do provide about 33% of the manufacturing opportunities in the country as well. So we're talking about an industry which is extremely significant for the country. But as you rightly said, I think if we are to plot ourselves against some of the other countries like Bangladesh, China, India, Taiwan, Vietnam, we are far behind in terms of our growth aspirations as well as like where we stand right now. Just to give some further context, if you look at Bangladesh, I think they're looking at close to about $53 billion of exports by 2025. And India is looking at close to about 100 billion exports by like 2025, 26. And Indonesia, close to about 75 billion by 2030. And here we are, as Sri Lanka, we are looking at $5.5 billion for 2022, 2023 period, and looking at comparatively to those other countries way behind. So I think looking at how all these are playing across, I would look at it from three angles, like from more of a consumer perspective, more from a brand perspective, and from a manufacturing perspective. So if you had to really look at the consumer perspective, as you rightly know, like we have a extremely softening key consumer markets, which is the US and the EU markets that we are looking at. And if you look at their growth forecast, I think IMF downgraded like some of their key economies, close to about the growth forecasts have been downgraded quite significantly for this year and next year as well. And the inflation rates are like reaching double digits. Similarly, on the US, like known facts, the Ukraine war, the Russia-Ukraine war, and the US inflation has brought down some of the inventory levels high due to COVID, and then things are now moving as well. So if you're really looking at other countries versus Sri Lanka, from a consumer perspective, I think all of us are experiencing a similar downturn. Apart from the fact, countries like India, which is also catering to India, or places like Southeast Asian countries, which is catering to China probably. And if I'm to move towards brands, brands are also like looking at reducing their supply chain shocks, right? So you would see a renewed interest in terms of onshoring or like nearshoring that is coming up. And you would see some of the major players, even in the Sri Lankan market, is present in Haiti, Egypt, Jordan, in some of the other Caribbean countries. So overall, if you look at where we stand, I think from a supply chain perspective is where we could potentially do more. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about verticality and how supply chain is going to help us get to those levels. So I'll stop at that, Anam, and we can move on to looking at verticality in the subsequent years.
Yeah. I mean, Sympathy, I think it's a good time to bring it up now, because it's one thing that I've seen here is the complete lack of verticality and the reliance on importing so many of the raw materials. The question being, what are the biggest blockers to the growth? I think verticality, and the lack of it is a big one. Do you want to jump in and on that point as it being a blocker to growth?
Sure. So I think if you look at supply chain, we talk about verticality, but in all honesty, it could be a true vertical where you're a part of that organization, or it could be a virtual verticality as well. But what we're not seeing right now is, if you look at Sri Lanka, our supply chain, or like our suppliers, are very much fragmented. So just to complete or manufacture one garment, we are looking at 3 to 4 different countries where we need to get the accessories and fabrics from. So that itself builds quite a bit of lead time, that itself builds quite a bit of cost into the process. And also with everything that's happening around the world, it brings so much shocks into the whole seamless process as well. So that's one of the massive roadblocks that we are seeing against a country like India, where most of their fabric is pretty much sourced within the country, which gives them a massive advantage. Also, if you look at certain countries like, let's say, like Vietnam or Taiwan, similar situation where they have the verticals within the country, which brings them a lot of advantage in terms of the lead time and cost. So I think for us to grow, or for us to rather be competitive from a cost and a lead time perspective, that's one of the critical elements we definitely need to look at.
Thanks, Empathy. And I think in the current environment where disruptions are the new normal, that vulnerability of relying on suppliers from outside of Sri Lanka has really been exposed here. So verticality, we know, is one big blocker of growth. Jacina, I would love you to jump in on what you believe is another big blocker of growth. You had some really interesting comments to make about the ecosystem that there is here. If you could start that conversation off, that'd be great. Jacina, you're on mute.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I would like to start with like the business ecosystem. So I was fortunate to attend a lean program in Japan, and I went to Tokyo and I managed to visit the systems and see how they expose the systems to not just their own teams, they expanded on to the younger generation. So they incorporate school children on school visits and on school trips to come in and learn and see the industry. So I would say in our country, we seem to be lacking that in kind of that ecosystem where there's more involvement from the communities, and then they can come in and see and learn, and then kind of create like a ecosystem where we join in hands and they work together to grow our industry. Because right now, with the way education is here, we have great systems to teach, but then afterwards it doesn't get incorporated into the local industry. It usually, these efforts they tend to head off to a different country, sometimes to Bangladesh, sometimes to other countries where their experience and expertise is more utilized. So I feel like there should be more growth in the ecosystem, as well as getting the government to get more involved to kind of create this this attitude shift and this to kind of get people to be united and be more willing to stay in Sri Lanka. Because there's a lot of times where we learn, we gather all our information, and then we head out, and then we either send the cash back or we kind of develop elsewhere, whereas we can develop here. So definitely creating these ecosystems starting from a younger age, which is what I saw in Japan. They would bring school kids from all years, not just like a certain year, from different years, so then they can just learn the system. And I was fortunate enough to go learn it. And so not only are they showing their local schools and stuff, they're also teaching the international market about their system. So it creates this huge dynamic where everyone gets this opportunity to learn and grow together. And it's not just like, okay, this is mine, I will keep this information to myself. It's a very open ecosystem where they show and explain and train people on how to work on it together.
I think you touched on something really important, the ecosystem. But I also think ecosystem is quite a hard concept to understand. And a while ago, I did a little bit of consulting on this, and I want to show everyone MIT's ecosystem strategy framework. so that we can begin to think about this issue. And what MIT, their whole framework was, at the bottom, you have your foundational institutions. You need to have strong government, strong rule of law, strong financial institutions. And as an outsider, Sri Lanka is weak in its foundational institutions. But building on top of that, there's two capacities that I've seen, that MIT have shown us, is that one is the entrepreneurial capacity, and two is the innovation capacity. And then the key thing is how these capacities link to each other. So with innovation, it's, are you innovating fast enough? How are the strength of your universities? Are you attracting the innovators? And on the entrepreneurial capacities, it's about scaling the innovation and creating those linkages. So the reason that I show you this, because it can now help us think about, okay, where does Sri Lankan apparel fit? How strong is its ecosystem? So looking at this, Jacina, and looking at the ability to innovate, which is your innovation capacity, and then the ability to scale the innovation, where do you see as the biggest issues?
I think, if I'm being honest, we're quite at a disadvantage, because when we look at all the other countries and their innovations, so if you look at it, China is way beyond everyone else in so many vertical fields and so much stuff. Vietnam is also quite advanced in tech, so a lot of companies, and also Vietnam has the benefit of being duty free, so a lot of brands are headed that direction because of the cost benefit and also innovations. Sri Lanka, we are sort of in this perfect little niche. We fall under high quality garments, and we also fall under, we are a bit expensive, but we guarantee with our quality. But on the innovative side, we are stepping into that, most definitely. I have seen a lot in different wearable tech growths, so that's a huge positive. But in terms of anywhere else, it's sort of a bit lacking, because a lot of people don't have the capital to invest, if I'm being honest, and also the government support needs to come in. There's a bit of a when you think about digitizing and moving forward in the future, a lot of people try to look at that in a negative light, because it seems like there'll be less work for people to do and it'll be more digital. So then it's sort of, there's like a little pullback between like wanting to step into the future, because they want to keep like the employment at a high level and everything. So there's a bit of a negative viewpoint. That's definitely key when we can expand and teach people.
Jacina, what about the actual ecosystem of trying to build a business here? For example, how well are the universities connected to the biggest problems and opportunities in apparel manufacturers? And then how well are they connected to the actual companies themselves, and then the investors, and then the tech businesses? It's that entire ecosystem. How well or how badly?
I would say we are much more on the lower end. I do know that a lot of university students reach out for internships, and like a lot of schools contact various companies to ask them, would you be keen to bring on these students for internship to learn the system and learn things. So that aspect is there, but is that enough is the question, because there's a lot you can learn, and then if they're doing just a 3 to 6 month internship, there's not so much they can get advantage of unless they specialize. So I would say it's definitely on the lower end, but there is room to grow, and so that's what we should really focus on. Like, how can we grow and how can we get more support or create more of this ecosystem?
Got it. Indrajit and Sympathy, any comments about the strength of the ecosystem here to enable the growth, having built your career in this country?
Yeah, I think one of the points that I would like to highlight, Anami, is I think what you said is right in terms of the foundational institutions and government, because you have a very good example, once again, just in India, right? I think in 2014, 2015, they launched this program called Digital India, where they digitalized the entire government systems to everything. And what you saw after that in the apparel industry, not just apparel industry, in terms of the manufacturing industry, is a huge effort, even in the private sector, putting into digitalized economies or digitalized processes within the organizations. Now, if you look at it from a brand's perspective, India is actually looked at as a better supply chain, which is more streamlined and digitized, right? And it's not a job that was done overnight. We're talking about a journey that has taken them almost 7 to 8 years. So little things like that, even from a government perspective, would go a long way when it comes to Sri Lanka. And the other one that Josina spoke about is the whole technology collaborations. I think what we need to understand is we as Sri Lankans is an expert in apparel manufacturing, right? But what we lack is sometimes the expertise in innovations or technology. That does not necessarily mean we need to reinvent the wheel, right? It's all about collaborating with the right partners. It's sometimes collaborating with different institutions who already have those technology in place. Like a really good example is, I think, if you look at Walmart, they worked with a sustainable focused company to come up with this biodegradable or a bio bra, which is called Kindly, I think last year or year before, which is not their forte, right? But they worked with another collaborator to do it. So if you really look back, like in retrospect, if you look at the Sri Lankan apparel industry, how much are we really working with different experts is a question that I think we all should ideally answer or look at.
Somebody, do you think the expertise are in Sri Lanka? Or do you think there's just an absence of it, that innovation expertise?
I think we do have a lot of capable people technologically and non-technologically within the country as well. It's just we are probably not looking at the right areas, or we're probably not looking at the right solutions in this scenario. I do also have a very good example, and I'm like from MAS itself. They recently launched Filmography, which is basically innovative solutions provided for women from menarche to your menopause. You talk about like your periods, what sort of products that you can give them, and you talk about like hot flashes, like everything that you normally don't talk about or you don't normally find solutions in. We work pretty much like internally and with some of the collaborators to come up with like some great products that we are now catering to different businesses. So I think that is what we need to see more as a country, because those are the things that is going to take us to the next level as well. Because right now, the market that we are catering to, which is the mass market, mass production market, might exist for the next, let's say, like 5 years, 10 years. But how much are we ready or geared to sometimes address some of the oncoming trends is and always would be a question.
Essentially, we're going to come back onto what are the growth opportunities and how well Sri Lanka is positioned to take advantage of those. Just want to bring it back to your point that you made there about the expertise. One of the things I've seen here is incredible amount of R&D investment when it comes to things like material innovation. It does that is not translated when it comes to digital, when it comes to AI. And very good at one type of innovation. It looks like we're lacking capabilities in this other space. And at the same time, what I've seen is Sri Lanka has the best apparel manufacturing talent in the world. It's built this industry in other countries. So I think there is that capabilities gap in mathematics, digital, AI. I'm just not seeing it being applied here. Indrajit, what are you seeing here with the capabilities that might be missing, that we need to be leveraging here?
I think, Anam, like from my personal thought of view, like we do have capabilities inside, like wherever the angles, even the AI or even like high-tech digitalization and all. But the problem is like wherever the people who has acquired this knowledge, it's been out of the country most of the time, because like there are no such spacious research centers or whatever thing like established in Sri Lanka. Like if you take Slita as a classic example, where everyone is born around, like whoever tried to come into the field, like they were studying on there wherever, but they don't really do researches and all. So when it comes to like the knowledge which people acquired in different industries where they can contribute for apparel, they don't have really space in the country to contribute in a way. So that's what the main reason where we are lacking with the knowledge and the expertise in a way. So if we have started some sort of a things like innovative things and start showcasing others, like, so whenever we are like going for the customer visits or wherever thing, so we only show about this whatever the capability, stitching capabilities only like that for the customers. But if we can bring into these new innovative high-tech wearable stuff and all, do marketing on those as well, like voice out what we're really capable of. So that will retain whoever, like that will bring back whoever having the knowledge to back into the country. I think that will be one area which we really need to focus. I think that's what we are really lacking actually, especially the research centers, like especially in like Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. If you take, so if classic example, Bangladesh. So most of the Sri Lanka has been migrated to Bangladesh and did the high-end work over there, top management, and also since they didn't have these expertise, but realize what they have done there was like they have started institutes like MBAs, master degrees, and everything and all, and they started research centers over there. So that really bring the younger generation more focus on those areas, and they started working at it, and that build the original Bangladesh people start working on the apparel industry and bring more newness into the field. So that's what really lacking, I think, in Sri Lanka.
Brilliant. I want to bring it back to the foundational institutions. Now, there's obviously been a suite of new tax policies implemented. Going into this slide. Okay, if we look at, I mean, this is just something that I found online about income tax for apparel manufacturing countries. There is, I guess the broader point is that other countries have a lot more support from their institutions. I would love to know from your side how you see institutional support for this industry, and what do you think is needed that isn't currently provided now? Jacina, do you want to get us started on this?
Yeah, my viewpoint, especially with 2022 being such an economic crisis for Sri Lanka, a lot of the buyers and a lot of the clients are very aware about it, because it was blown up to a larger degree in the international media. But irrespective of that, we have now this situation where we are considered a bit unstable. So we had buyers reaching out, expressing their concern and of safety concerns and economical concerns, because they're worried about their orders, how they can execute. Will there be a problem with delivery? Because we had the fuel crisis where we had like nearly 5-hour power cuts a day. And if you want a company that was obviously with a lot of capital to get the fuel and keep it ready, you had to deal with the consequences. If you had the generator, great, but then you needed the oil for it. So there was this unstable environment towards the beginning of the year, which had a huge impact, because the other international parties are just worried about their orders, because then they started thinking maybe we should look to invest elsewhere. So I think definitely if the government can come up with a system maybe to kind of implement more appeal for the buyers to put their orders here, like usually. So we have GSP plus benefit, but even to get that benefit took a very long time. And there are also other countries that do completely duty free. And so then customers, like how we view our suppliers and like who we choose to work with, customers are also viewing, because we are a supplier to them. So they're also viewing us as who they want to work with. And then they have the whole international market. So then they can like consider, okay, Sri Lanka is a bit unsure at the moment, let's shift it somewhere else. So definitely we do need, I think, some support from the government just to create maybe I don't know if it's a tax break, or create like a system, maybe look into duty-free options or benefits that can bring more business to our country. And I think definitely the government needs to kind of step in and be like, well, yeah, we did have this financial issue, but we have overcome it, and these are the benefits we want to provide to other people, to just bring back that assurity and that want for people to be like, all right, Sri Lanka's heading in the right direction, let's head there. We need to give them some sort of incentive, most definitely.
Sampathi, you mentioned India and the work that the government initiated there almost 7-8 years ago, and how they're seeing the fruits of that labor now. If we took that, I mean, India or anybody else, who is a good role model that you think we could learn from in terms of what successful intervention can look like?
I think to be very honest, most of the Asian countries, I would say. Because as I said at the beginning, and I'm like, our scale or our volume is very, very small compared to the other countries that we're competing with in the Asian region. But I think what I need to mention is I think places like JAF, communities like JAF is doing quite a bit of work to support the apparel industry and work very closely with government to see how we can potentially grow this industry or grow even the textile industry into the next levels. So it would be, I don't think it would be correct to say that we don't have it in place, but what we can do with the infrastructure or the setup that we have within is what we can potentially look at. I know that there's a fabric park that's coming up in Batiklo. We spoke about verticality. So there are efforts, there are investments that government and JAF is working on to obviously like upgrade the industry that we are having. But I think where we will need more support, or rather where we will look for more support, would be definitely in identifying those niche high value opportunities and how technology could come into play to pretty much like resolve them. Because what we are seeing is, Anam, is things like even direct to consumer models are increasing, right? So we are not any longer talking about 28, 30 days lead time, someone placing an order 3 months before. We're not talking about such a massive lead times, right? So as an industry, if you really look at like, do we have enough capability? Do we have enough expertise? Do we have enough models or structures to look at as an industry? I'm not talking about individual companies, because someone might say company A is more advanced in this and some company B is not. But given that we're talking here about the industry as a whole, right? Like as an industry, do we share those best practices? Do we have a forum to share some of those best practices so everyone could elevate the level of performance? Do we look at technology advancements as an industry? Is an area probably job as well as like government could potentially support or look at for sure.
Got it. So improving collaboration. Somebody, you touched on something there that I think will start the next part of the conversation really well, is what are those growth opportunities taking place in global apparel that should be brought to the attention of investors, policymakers, those with resources to put into there? What are the growth opportunities you're seeing in global apparel, that niche areas right now that will grow?
So I think something that came up probably after the pandemic, it was there, but I think after the pandemic it has been heightened, is the fact that clothing pretty much expresses yourself, right? So how do you, like, we look at three things. If you look at the apparel industry, it's primarily three things: how affordable are your clothing, how sustainable, and how functional, right? And with the pandemic, what happened is like some of these boundaries that we were looking at or talking about earlier are slowly sort of like disappearing, right? Like we spoke about athleisure wear and then we spoke about lounge wear before. But now we are talking about sweatpants that's gonna pretty much give you the all-day wearability, right? And we spoke about men's clothing and women's clothing, but we are now looking at like very gender fluid clothing items that are coming up. So even in Sri Lanka, like you have these baggy size t-shirts that's gender fluid, right? So those are things that in terms of like from a design perspective itself, I'm not even talking about manufacturing, from a design perspective itself, how much are you putting effort to really look at it differently to give what the consumer wants is something that we can definitely explore more.
But what
That's
are those
on one angle.
What are those segments? There are really interesting segments that are growing. What are those segments that we should all be keeping an eye on and putting at least some resources to experiment? At least, what are those areas? If you could
I
list.
think one of the key areas would be would be the scalable and affordable sustainable products, right? We talk about sustainable fashion, and if you read news, like there's so many instances where we hear about greenwashing. Recently, I think Decathlon and H&M like had massive fines because of greenwashing. And we're talking about, even with most of the brands that we are working with currently, they're looking at closed looping, they're looking at circularity. So that would be a massive segment as long as we can convert it into a more affordable segment. And I think like recently we are even looking at putting a similar to a price tag, looking at putting a carbon tag on our garments, right? So I think in EU or France and EU, they're looking at making it mandatory in the upcoming years. I know it's just policies being spoken about and discussed, and I don't know how much it would realize into reality in the next 2 to 3 years. But definitely that's where the trend is. That's what people are talking about. So how ready are we? Like, are we ready to cater to that market? Would be like good questions that.
Yeah. And I was just going to ask it, Indrajit. We have these growth opportunities like sustainability, like wearable, tech garments, like feminine hygiene garments. So we have these growth areas. What is the blocker in Sri Lankan apparel taking advantage of those opportunities?
And like, if you look at the reality, everyone is doing a business in a way. So when it comes to the reality, so what really happens is like everyone is focusing on the profitability, the scale of production and all. So when it comes to the niche market, the investment is much more higher for especially the high tech stuff and all. The machine investment, even the work capital and everything and all, even the knowledge capital. So are we really ready to take that challenge is a question mark actually. So that's the biggest bottleneck what we really have. Like, even though we do have idea about where are the potential areas for the growth, where we really need to attack, the key players in the apparel manufacturing industry in Sri Lanka, are they really willing to take that challenge and move forward? That's the question mark we have really. So I think the biggest bottleneck is like everyone is talking about everything, even the customers and all, like when it comes to the sustainability or wherever things, even the customers, like whenever we are traveling around with the fashion fairs and everything and all, most of the customers, like, they are really highlighted, okay, fine, this is really good, this is really good fabric and all, we need to select this one, we need to do garments on it. And when it comes to the actual reality, the order quantity is less than 500 sometimes. So that will give a negative impact for the apparel manufacturers in Sri Lanka to invest more on that. So I think that will be a biggest bottleneck what we really have. And I think people need to understand, whoever the giant leads in the apparel manufacturing industry, like, this will be the next level and we need to invest on that, even though at the current moment people are still adapting for the system.
Brilliant. So on the point about the blockers, and I think it's really interesting how we're able to see the industry built by industrialists playing on a, driven by profits, driven by scale, and versus the new innovative areas where there is a big sunk cost. You have to spend a lot on R&D before you see any returns. You have to do a lot of experimentation. So Jacina, I guess jump in here as to why you feel that the industry perhaps isn't taking advantage of those opportunities.
Well, why we aren't taking advantage. So like Indrajit mentioned, as much as there is a lot of growth in the industry and there is a lot of people keen for newer advanced tech and all of that, a lot of the times buyers still focus on the price point, and niche markets and tech, as much as it's fantastic and it's wonderful where we're going, there is a huge growth there, and but you have to tap into the right markets. But if you look at the mass production, which is what Sri Lanka and a lot of these Asian countries are geared for, there is not a lot of demand for wearable tech in the mass production figures, because it's just not something that a lot of people might be willing to afford. And also for the buyers to do mass production, they want the lowest cost possible. So as much as they look for sustainability, as well as all these new fabrics and these innovative fabrications, which Sri Lanka does have as well, it does fall down onto price point. And a lot of the times, we do need to definitely develop more in our innovation so we can bring our cost factor down. But because the demand for the low price and the demand for innovation, there's like a fine line that's threaded. And does the buyer take that step to invest? Or do they take a step back and we're like, nah, we'll just go with the usual and just people will buy it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You have to stay in business before you can innovate about the future, right? Okay, cool.
Sorry, just before you put, I think also one more thing from an apparel industry perspective that I think we need to critically do is, we are known as apparel manufacturers. We are not known as a design and development destination, right?
Yeah.
We are known as a place that does garments without guilt. I think as an industry, that's the branding that we need to start looking at, because some of these technologies, I think we currently do not have an avenue to push through some of those to the brands because we are known as apparel manufacturers. So the design and development sometimes happens in Europe or in the US, and then it's passed on to us for production, right? So how do we really move ourselves from being known as apparel manufacturers to that elevated level of value adding designers and developers is something as an industry we definitely need to look at. So beyond the price points that we all spoke about.
Fantastic. So I think it's a great opportunity for us now to move on to the second part of the discussion. We've established where the growth opportunities are, the blockers in taking advantage of those opportunities. One of the biggest blockers is supply chain. And we started this conversation off looking at the issues with verticality. Where to start? Jacina, what are the biggest blockers or the biggest bottlenecks that you've had to deal with in apparel supply chains?
Well, I think because there's less verticality in Sri Lanka, and that's one of the possible downside to working with Sri Lanka, is a lot of our garments, a lot of our items we have to import in. Yes, we do have systems and the lead times we can manage and we can tackle with the international markets, but it's still a factor, because if you implement verticality, we can shorten that lead time significantly. And then we can provide to the customer, which then the faster turnarounds, the customer is definitely happy. So one of the downsides is not only just the lead time, but then even to find the right supplier, to check if they're reliable, to check how their customer service is.
Let's go down that point. Let's go down that route, because I think it's really critical in this resiliency topic. How do you do that? And what is wrong with the way that the industry is choosing suppliers right now and deciding its criteria?
So right now, depending on the item, we, well, at least at my company, we look at a handful, so 3 to 5 suppliers providing the same item. Then we compare the prices, we compare the lead times, we compare also the communication and all these factors, and just see. We definitely, the factors that we look for is technical knowledge, quality, and on-time deliveries. And recently, because of the incoming instability of COVID and the markets and everything, definitely financial status of these companies and these suppliers that you're working with plays a significant role, because you have to be able to understand if they are financially strong, and then see like and open the window to transparency, because that's what our clients do with us. So if you reverse the role and if you take like a brand, they look at us as a supplier and they check our things as well. They check our transparency and our stability, and especially with Sri Lanka being in an unstable economic crisis at the moment, it's a factor that weighs heavily on the decisions to move in. So that same amount we should apply onto our suppliers, because the same factor, because we transfer their information that they provide us onto the buyer. So there has to be a window to have open transparency to understand from both parties. But then a lot of the times when we work, especially if we work with a new supplier, it's hard to gauge some of these factors, and then to evaluate the risk is quite difficult, especially if it's a new supplier. We can ask the right questions and we can kind of do our own internal evaluation, but then when it comes to execution of the order, the delivery item on time, especially with working with a first-time client or first-time supplier, there's a huge risk there, because you are doing everything you can to be precautious, but then what happens if there's like a downfall somewhere? They have financial instability, or they aren't able to hit the delivery on time, because that will mean we have to reach out to our buyers and say, we can't hit the delivery. And so to kind of vote it, it seems like we stick to non-traditional viewpoints, and definitely financial status is something that we have like implemented as soon as like we saw this instability in the economic markets. But even still, I feel there is room to further that. It's just we need to develop the right kind of analytics to kind of see how we can study it in a more broader sense.
One of the big problems I've seen here is almost the complete absence of risk as a criteria for choosing your suppliers. Most manufacturers here are looking at operational performance, so on-time deliveries, quality, lead time, and cost. And there's an absence of reliability. And I don't think procurement in general, not just Sri Lankan procurement, but there is this maturity in understanding every single order carries risk. I think the financial services industry understands this, and they understand at any given time how much risk that they're carrying, and they take decisions at the beginning. So, Indrajit, from a supplier selection criteria, what are some of the criterias that you're looking at now that were perhaps maybe more important now than they were before?
Actually, Anand, at this moment, I think we really need to focus on this traceability factor, because that will be more important. Because like, if you take 5 years back, we were never thinking about the traceability. So we were like looking at this just like she explained, like we were looking at the quality, OTIF, and all the stuff only. So, but now at the moment, most of the customers are like really focusing on this sustainability, traceability, where the yarn is coming from, where the raw material is coming from. Are they compliant enough? So that will be a one key factor which we really need to focus at this moment, which we will be able to streamline within another 2-3 years. Because like now at the moment, with this trade wars going on between China and USA, this Xinjiang cotton crisis and everything and all, with all these cotton banks. So I think traceability, sustainability angle, the certification, visibility of the supply chain, end-to-end supply chain will be a key factor, key evaluating point needs to be play as a, it will be play a big role, I think.
Got it. So just to confirm, what you're saying there is traceability is a criteria. You ask your suppliers, where did this come from?
Yeah.
And their ability to tell you is a criteria. Fantastic. So brilliant there. On the point about transparency, sympathy. Sri Lanka is known for having good labor practices, is known for, low levels of ESG risk. Things are done quite ethically here, but the issue seems to be with the supply chain and that ESG risk with overseas suppliers. What have you seen here, and what's the bottleneck?
I think, by the way, like as we speak, Anam, the ESG has evolved into EESG. I was reading about it yesterday. They've added another E to look at economical aspects as well. It was very interesting. So I think to point that Indrajit and Josina mentioned, so you're looking at the environmental factors of like how sustainable your supply chain is, or rather how sustainable, like looking at like carbon emissions, how much of carbon emissions, what's your carbon footprint, even going into that levels, right? And also what we are seeing is if you look at how we are assessing our supply chains right now, as they both mentioned, we are looking at more performance aspects. And to be fair by the industry, and I think like until a couple of years back, we dealt with our suppliers as transactional suppliers, right? We did not look at any of the supply partnerships as strategic supply partnerships. That's where that step up is coming to right now. So when you're moving from the transactional to strategic level, all those performance indicators are going to be your just basic foundations, but it's going to be how compatible you are as a strategic partner to take your business into the next level. So I am thinking, even to an extent where you're looking at a technically virtual one P&L instead of multiple P&Ls, where you're adding profits onto each other's numbers, and then you're practically quoting your brand something that's humongously expensive. We need to look at models as such as well. Those are some of the bottlenecks that we currently have, because even though we talk about verticality, even within the country, we still look at P&Ls separately. We still look at keeping those margins on top of each other. So cost competitiveness, yes, we are after, but how far are we going to try to achieve that by reducing our overheads versus going towards models like this is definitely something that we need to look at.
Sympathy, what needs to change in the criteria with which you choose your suppliers? Some really good points here mentioned about looking at the financials more. Indrajit mentioned traceability is now a criteria. From your side, from what you've seen with the customers and what the customers want, what are new criterias we have to be looking at suppliers with?
I think one more point in addition to that would be the innovativeness, right? Like how much of innovation do you bring to the table, right? Because some of the innovations or the spaces that we are talking about, the tech comes from the fabric itself, not necessarily from the garment, mostly from the fabric. So how much are they collaborating with the manufacturer to come up with those innovative fabrics would be another area that we would look at. Pretty much like how agile they are, right? Like in all these aspects. So all these things that we are talking about, direct to consumer models, we are talking about, direct to printing models, all that ultimately, like the lead time adds up, right? So how agile are you to pretty much complement the models that the apparel manufacturers are looking towards is definitely a key area that we would need to look at in future.
Fantastic. Now, before we move on to the next section, I just wanted to bring up some questions. So question for, I'm not sure who this addressed to. This is from Prasanta. Can you elaborate in detail how the order placement in Sri Lanka is affected by US and European buyers? Give more insights with facts and numbers. Not quite sure what that means. How order placements in Sri Lanka is affected by US and European buyers.
I think in general, if I'm to take it, and I think overall across the industry, we are looking at 20 to 25% of a drop for the last quarter. I think Indrajit, you could add on to it. And also, if you're looking at the first half of next year, the first 3 months obviously is going to be quite a low period for across the industry. And also, I think one of the biggest reasons why we are seeing that is most of the Sri Lankan apparel manufacturers are catering to that middle value segments, which is the PVHs, VS, Nikes, Adidas, Gap, right? But we are also seeing on the US consumer side, most of these consumers moving into low value markets like the Walmarts and the Targets now, right? So we as an industry, we don't necessarily cater high volumes to those particular segments. So that's where we are seeing like further drop. So I think until about the end of first quarter, we are seeing 20 to 25% of a drop across the industry. Indrajit, you can add on to it.
I had a question for you as well.
Okay.
We see how threatening is orders moving out of Sri Lanka to other countries. How threatening is that for Sri Lankan apparel? We know the trend that's going on. This country can't compete with low labor costs in the way that other parts of, say, Africa can. How threatening is that to the industry here?
So I'm like, there'll be no right or wrong answer, straightforward answer, but like, just like simple said, like we are all kept behind, like kept blind for Q1, Q2 probably because of these situations, like especially in Europe and US. So how threatening it is, like it's too early to predict, because like even Bangladesh being impacted with this, there are a lot of order drops in Bangladesh as well as in Pakistan and India. It's same all across the globe, I think. Even in China, there's a huge drop. So how threatening it is, I think survival will be the fittest. So if we like adapt for this situation, like wherever the customers are asking different changes, favorations and all, if we, rather than killing ourselves, if we like sacrifice ourselves in Q1 to adopt with that, I think we'll be able to mitigate the risk. Actually, we do have some sort of a good experience inside, especially the higher level people who are dealing with the customers and all, and who are the experts actually. So we survived during the COVID period as well. And I think if we continue the same approach and all, we'll be able to sustain, at least sustain where we were before. Like we were like doing about like 5 billion, close to 5 billion. I think we'll be able to retain that business. So especially like since we are like good at quality and good at like loyalty and transparency and all, I think we'll have a much more chance than others, especially like Bangladesh and the higher volume customers, like high volume producers. So I think there's a threat for everyone. So for us, what we really need to focus is like to identify the key areas where we need to focus and then attack on that. And I just want to go back one point where Sympathy was like mentioned as well, and I'm sorry for taking some time. So innovations, like just like she explained, like that will be key criteria, but like at this moment, everyone is running through with this financial crisis, like there are inflation here and there. So most of the customers are coming with asking the discount. So that will be a key challenge everyone is having. So I think most of the suppliers, when we are selecting suppliers, we need to work on the suppliers who are really innovative on the providing the same product with a cheaper cost. So that will be one key criteria which we really need to focus at this moment, because like if you take like customers like Hugo Boss and Levi's, they were like quite challenging on reducing their FOBs actually. At this moment, that is the biggest challenge. So if you take Levi's, there are very big players in US market. So they like hold about like even in Bangladesh, Pakistan, they are really rely on those customers. So whenever they are coming and asking for a discount, so are we really ready to take this challenge? Are we innovative enough to figure out ways to take that challenge and give the discount whatever they want to survive? I think that will be the key turning point for us to stay in the industry, sustain in the industry.
Brilliant, thank you, Indrajit. And I think one of the comments here, it says, in fact, it's the same companies moving the orders out from LK to other countries due to costs and profits. So I think you're talking about cancelled orders. Why are we seeing cancelled orders? I think a big part of that answer is related to risk. There's the upstream vulnerability risk here with the raw materials being imported. Then you've got the manufacturing risk here with the unstable economic environment, issues with energy. So I think risk is such a big part. If I'm a big brand and I have to assess the risk in my sourcing portfolio, Sri Lanka would be on the end of the spectrum where there's a higher risk. Okay, so what I want to open up a poll now before we jump into the final section, and then we're going to have a Q&A. So I'm just going to get the poll out. Okay, the poll is running. This will help get some good questions as well. So please, if everybody could open up the poll, that would be great. And we'd look forward to your answers. Now, the last part of the question is, today's session is about the modern manufacturer. And what does a modern manufacturer look like? The first part I want to talk about is culture. I mentioned at the beginning of this session that this generation is the technologist generation. There is a passing of the baton going on. The question is, how long will it take for these ideas? Not if, Will they be adopted? How long will it take? And my first question is about culture. What needs to change in the organization's culture to become more digitally savvy, more innovative, and more data enabled? Jacina, do you want to kick us off here about organizational culture and what needs to change?
Well, organizational culture that I feel needs to change is no change happens with one person. Like, you might have one person who has the vision. That vision needs to be passed along throughout the organizational structure, from the smallest job position all the way up to the highest job position. So just having one person like screaming from the rooftops that we need to do this is not enough. It's a team effort, and it definitely needs to be implemented and taught. One of the methods that when I went to Japan, when I learned the lean system, is definitely out of box thinking. And that didn't come from us learning what we know and then doing things the same way that we always do it. It's definitely learning to adapt. So to consider that, you definitely need to have a vision. You need the team to support and be able to adapt towards that goal, and to have one goal and to head that way. Because like I said, you have one person screaming out from the rooftops, and everyone else looks at them and they're just like, what is this person talking about? It's pointless. But if you manage to band together a few more people, you can implement that change. And then the more people you grow, they will understand. The more training you do, or the more just methods of teaching. I've seen, like, when I work with my team on a one-on-one basis, I've helped them sort of like move away from their rigid structure of like, okay, this is my job, this is all I need to do, just to like kind of just open it up and open their thinking to like a different way. And then they start thinking a bit more. So then it just becomes a knock-on effect. So definitely all from the lowest, like from the smallest job all the way to the higher end, it needs to be implemented as a core foundation, and it should be taught across the board.
Brilliant. Something interesting there was a single visionary at the top can't pull off a miracle. They need the support structure behind them, the culture, the values. That was really interesting. Sympathy, from your side, when it comes to culture in the industry here, what needs to change for us to become more digitally enabled, more innovative, more data enabled?
I think this might sound controversial, but I'm going to say this anyway. I think we have a perception that it's only the young generation that could really change in terms of turning an organization into a more digitized organization, right? But what we need to understand is we are working in an industry where we have experts who've been working in the industry for the last 15 to 20 years, who are experts in the process, who are experts in the operation, or who are experts in governance, right? So I think one of the biggest changes that needs to happen is figuring out a way to coexist and figuring out a way to really drive this change together. Because the more we try to sort of like push back and forth about like who's more suitable to do this change, do you really need a younger person to do the change, or why are these people not adapting? It's always going to be a conversation and just an argument around it. I think as an organization, figuring out how you can actually coexist in terms of like how do you actually use the expertise of the individuals who have decades of experience and take another set of individuals who are from a younger generation and see how we can drive this together would be one of the massive change factors. And I think that's one, Anam. And I think the second thing is this whole process is going to be change management, right? Like you're talking about an organization that's run on manual processes now being transferred to digitalizing, and then you're talking about product development that happened very manually, now moved into virtual prototyping and using different systems, right? So the change, when you say change management, it's all about also understanding who are your real change agents and what role is your management going to play, what sort of questions or what are the right questions to ask. And also, I think we are very much used as a traditional industry to we use like management by objectives, right? You set objectives at the beginning of the year and you manage by it. But what happens is it sort of like underemphasizes the need or underemphasizes the environment in which those objectives are set, because we are right now living in an evolving world, like everything is changing every second, every day, right? So unless you move to a more like a management by exceptions methodology within the organization, you're not going to see a lot of change in these areas within the company. And lastly, I'll just mention one point about the skills, right? Like how proactive as an organization are you about your skill base? So you recruit and you pretty much predict what are the future skills that are required. And I'm not talking about just management, but at the shop floor level itself. From shop floor level to above, what are those future skills that are required, and how proactive are we to really train people and multi-skill people on those skills? Those would be my key three things to look at.
I thought the first one was really important, and I just want to emphasize that again about coexistence. So from my experience as a founder of a tech company, I'm a techie. I can only build tech if I collaborate with the subject matter expert. And we go on a collaboration journey together where they take all of their experiences in manufacturing. We take all of our expertise in tech and we work together. We coexist together. We're not here to replace you. We're here to enhance you. So that point about coexistence, I think, just operates on multiple levels: young versus old, tech versus subject matter experts. And I think it's so important that we adopt that mindset. And going on to the next point, Indrajit, is there a genuine fear about tech in organizations? Is there a fear of headcount reductions?
I think at this moment, Anam, everyone is looking at tech side, like automations, innovations, and all. In order to give you a straightforward answer, we really see within the country there are lack of human labor. So only solution to be sustained in the industry, only solution to be carrying out the industry, I think we need to bring out more innovative, high-tech stuff into the production, especially because like most of the people are moving out from the industry, especially like when it comes to a manufacturing side, like these automated machineries and like AI-driven machinery will be some key game changers in the future. Even like just like Simply said, like we do need expertise in hand, but like it'll be very niche in the future. Near future, it will be very niche area. Like there will be limited people who will be really expert in the industry, and there needs to be some additional people who needs to do the groundwork as well. So with the lack of human labor, I think these robotic things, AI-driven, algorithmic innovations will be key factor to sustain, be competitive with each other from cost angle as well. Initial investment will be much more higher, but like in the end, the productivity and the usage and everything, and if you consider everything, the ROI, I think that's where we really need to go.
Fantastic. Okay, brilliant, guys. Now I would love to open up to Q&A, and I'm looking at the answers from the polls, some really interesting insights. And yeah, cool. So yeah, let's open up to question and answer now. Some questions that have come in. Usually Sri Lankan Apparel does not have good track record on operational excellence. This was more evident post-COVID to the current. This has also negatively influenced sourcing decisions of the customer. What are your thoughts and what initiatives should we be taking to establish confidence? Chandra Kumar, what a brilliant question. Does anybody want to take this? Jasina, Sympathy, Indrajit? Key question is, this has negatively influenced the sourcing decisions of the customers. What initiatives need to be taken from the manufacturing industry here to prevent cancelled orders? I think that's what the question is.
All right, I will touch upon it a little bit because I did mention the way, especially with this year has been quite unstable for Sri Lanka. So I've had customers directly tell me like, this is very worrying. And they've straight up said, should we move our orders? They've asked you directly, should we shift our orders to a different country because of the economic crisis, of the political stability of the government and all the protests and everything. It was just looked at negatively. So one of the key things is, because a lot of the customers you work with, if you are fortunate, you've built a long-term outstanding relationship with them. And so even though we had a bit of an unstable year, a lot of the times that loyalty and that customer service that you provide the customer will keep them coming back. So there's definitely an impact where there are some situations where you cannot control the economic crisis. That's something that's beyond anyone's control, but there are ways to mitigate it, and definitely be open, be clear to your client, explain what's actually going on, and then that visibility and transparency is what the customer really needs right now, because they need to understand it, because for them it's business as much as they are close and they want to work with you and everything. End of the day, it's their business that they are more concerned about. So definitely that transparency plays a big role. And if you are open and very transparent about your situation, you might need to ask for help, and they are willing to support as well. So I would definitely say customer service, being transparent on the situation helps a lot. And it's definitely something that, because like a lot of times, a lot of people keep the information to themselves till it's too last minute. And then the buyers lose their mind because they're just like, oh my God, what do I do? So definitely keeping that open visibility on the orders, and just so they can understand that you guys are managing it as best as you can, goes a long way. So that's how I would recommend dealing with buyers who are worried or scared about the risks. Definitely just keep an open, visible communication and a thought process and a discussion process with them. And then they are also willing to help and support too.
Got it. And it sounds like they're just it's about changing the relationship. It's about moving away from transactional into much deeper relationships. So do you have any thoughts about proactive steps manufacturers can take to deepen that relationship, to lower the chances of orders moving out and cancelled orders?
I think I'm not too sure if it's right to call it cancelled orders or Sanam, because I think like some of the cancelled order situations would have probably come through like for different reasons, like on especially on the demand side as well. But I think what we've done, I could speak of like what we've done to just make sure that that partnership remains quite strong, is that communication pretty much on a daily basis, right? So like irrespective of what happens here, it could be the fuel situation, it could be the sovereign, the debt crisis, it could be the issues that our people are going through. It was always about very transparent, open communication with the customers. And quite honestly, I think most of the customers, at least like MS has been working with, they have been very supportive during this period. It's not just during this period, actually from COVID to now, they've been extremely supportive. But I think that stemmed from the fact that we've been open from the initial, like the first day of the crisis itself. That's one. And the second thing is on the supplier side, right? Like it's also about having those very strategic partnerships with the suppliers. So it could be bringing that agility aspect into play when it comes to, could be advance ordering some of the material, or like some of our suppliers were like extremely supportive in actually manufacturing fabric and storing it in their locations without really shipping it until we really want it. So how those partnerships work could be extremely different from depending on the level of partnership you have with them.
Got it. Brilliant. Jayanga, sorry if I mispronounced your name. We do have strong areas such as handling complicated garments. Any views on how we can capitalize on our strengths? One thing I would add there is it's a strength, handling complicated garments is also a massive source of vulnerability. With that complexity comes the vulnerability. It's all of these different components and raw materials that come in to make that finished garment. So it's a strength, it's also a massive source of vulnerability. Any views on how we can capitalize on our strengths? So what is the strengths? I think that's really important. Like, what is Sri Lanka's strengths? And the one thing I've seen here is the quality of the talent at leadership level. This is the talent that builds out other industries. And the way that I'm seeing how the country is leveraging its strengths is this talent is building garment industries in other parts of the world. And it's maintaining it being a Sri Lankan company. So it's almost turning into from a manufacturing industry here to almost a service sector industry. And that's really exciting and it's really unique. So that's one way that I'm seeing Sri Lanka leveraging its strengths. Its strengths is the quality of its talent and it's exporting that talent across the world. Would love your thoughts, guys, on how you're seeing or how, what is the country's strengths and how can it capitalize on it?
My personal opinion is, Anam, is, see, we are, as I said before, we are great apparel manufacturers, right? We can make quality garments, we can make complex garments. So there are two ways of growth that we can look at, right? We can look at, obviously, with the growth that we're seeing on our brands and consumer end, we can obviously go and expand ourselves, like organic growth. And the second part is like, how much can we use that expertise and move it to like different adjacencies, like the wearable tech business, like the femtech that I was talking about. And we are looking at technology or apparel for like gaming communities. So those are completely different communities or different segments that we've not touched base before, or we've not really gone after before. So you don't necessarily need to change your strength. And as you rightly said, it's a strength and a vulnerability, because I think some of the cost structures that we have within the industry also is super buffered up and high to cater to those like super complex garments. So if you're looking at, as I said before, like consumers are moving towards more all-day wearability, more simpler garments, and we are talking about taking these heavy structures and trying to fit into models which needs a lower cost structures or lower cost models. So that becomes a vulnerability in that sense. But I think if you're talking about really using that strength, it's all about using the apparel manufacturing ability and moving into different adjacencies. I think as a country, we did well during the pandemic by looking at like PPEs, different PPEs that were produced and exported to different countries. So that is using your strength in a completely different setup.
Really good point. Indrajit, it sounds like there's a perfect question for you here. What steps should you implement to improve relationships with your suppliers to make them more of a strategic relationship?
So I think, Anam, like at this moment, everyone is struggling. Like not even the apparel manufacturers, even the suppliers. Like if you take, I've been meeting a lot of suppliers during past few weeks. Like most of them are like really worried about the order cancellation from the main key customers they have, like with the open capacity and all. So at this moment, I think this is a correct moment for us to start strategic relationship with the suppliers by showing them that we are there wherever we can contribute some sort of an unnominated business to those suppliers, be win-win both parties. Like there's no such way like this is we as a customer, you are the supplier, that will no longer working out. So if we be win-win for both parties, so that will be the key factor to build the trust among each other, rather than being a customer to a supplier. If you be more collaborative and if you be just like friends in a way, I would say, work with them. So that will be a key factor for them. And then the next step needs to be finding solutions together, rather than abandon someone else, like abandon the supplier. You need to work together. Like imagine like we have a problem, a classic problem with lead time. So then what we really can do is like we can have a discussion with each other and we do have free port facilities in Sri Lanka. So we can have a discussion with them and like open up facility for them in Sri Lanka where they can store the fabric for us, the core articles at least. So then that will sort out the issue. and everyone is running with energy crisis. Even in Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, everyone is running classic energy crisis at this moment, like power cuts and all that will really directly impacting the operation. So what we can really help them out, show them that we are with them at this moment. Like if we have open capacity inside, like if we can give them some breathing space rather than telling, look here, you have surpassed your deadline of garment X factory, fabric X factory. So you need to affect the fabric rather than telling that, look here, okay, fine, you delay for 1 week. So we will try to adapt for that and we'll make the garment shipment by sea. That will be really helpful and that will be really eye-opening for them. Whenever we are supporting for someone else when they are in trouble, I'm pretty sure that they will come back, because like, we all are human, like we all do have that sensitive touch in our hands. So I think whenever we can support each other, I think that's a brilliant way of building the collaboration each other rather than penalizing everyone will be the key factor at this moment for survival and building more strategic relationship than earlier, because like a joint venture and everything and all will be long-term things. But I think out of the box, supporting each other, take caring each other, that will be the really factor at this moment to be strategic and to be survive in this situation.
Thank you. There was a question for me, which I'd love to touch on, guys. What are some of the practical steps manufacturers can take to improve their resilience? So my background is not actually in supply chain, or nor is it in manufacturing. So how I got started in this space is I was just fascinated by it. And I read about 500-600 academic papers on the topic of supply chain risk and resilience. This was before I had ever stepped into a factory. And once I had actually gone into a factory, I saw this massive gap between the pace of research and what gets researched in supply chains and manufacturing and versus what gets implemented. You get world-leading universities here writing research, and it will take a decade before most manufacturers are using them. Now, there is a body of research on supplier selection. It's one of the most researched topics in supply chain. My advice to everyone is take a look at the research in supplier selection. And I actually put something together from one particular paper on this type of criteria you should be using. I think most people are using quality, delivery, and cost, your operational metrics. Now look at how complicated it can get. And sometimes simple isn't always best. For me, I would pack this up with risk criteria. In supply chains, there is a trade-off between cost and risk. This is why apparel, here's one for you. This is a report by McKinsey. McKinsey found apparel to be the second most exposed to supply chain disruptions to every other industry. And the reason is because it operates on low cost. And if you operate on low cost, and because of things like fast fashion, you need to pass that on to your supply chain. So, and then your supply chain becomes very fragmented. So the industry is inherently vulnerable. And one of the ways that you have to be thinking about minimizing your vulnerability is the criteria that you use for supplier selection. So it has to be a little bit more sophisticated, and it has to include risk criteria. And there is this trade-off between cost and risk. So the cheapest, high chance that is also the most vulnerable. The most expensive, which might be local to you, probably carries the lowest risk. There are these trade-offs in these supply selection decisions that are really complicated. And I don't think there is a level of sophistication in the methodology used in this industry that is actually required. So my 2 cents there. Okay, I think that's all of the questions. I'm just going to end the poll, and we are coming towards the end of the session. So okay, I'm just looking at these. Really interesting about the game-changing data. So a lot of answers for supply location issues. Oh, let me share the results. Okay, I've just shared the results. Hopefully you guys can see them.
Mm-hmm.
what data would be game-changing to you? A lot of people said supply location risks, commodity risks, shipping information. The good news is all of that information is available. How much visibility? People, there seems to be a lot of comfort in levels of visibility, which is good. Okay, fantastic. Right, there's nothing more from my side. Really interesting results there. I could keep talking about this for a while, but I think it'd be good to bring you back in now as we wrap up the session.
Thanks, Anam. And thank you to all of our speakers this evening as well. I think that was a very insightful discussion / presentation. And like you said, the results of the poll are also quite insightful. And I'm sure be material for the next session that we have planned coming up as well. If there are no more questions, I think one more question has just popped into the Q&A box. Anam, do you want to take a look at that, or shall we go ahead and conclude?
You can always look at multimodal transport solutions to reduce risk and manage costs. I need to have a think about that. Yes, I don't have an answer for that.
Great. So we'll give Adam some time to think about that, and the others as well, and maybe look at it at the next session. So thank you to all of our participants and viewers. It's been interesting to, I think, in the post-webinar world, as it were, because we don't really do virtual sessions much anymore. It was still interesting to see that there was quite a high interest, and almost all who signed up participated. So that's interesting to see as well, which shows again the absolute importance and impact of the topic that we're discussing in terms of building a resilient sourcing strategy. So until the next one, it's thank you and signing off from myself at AmCham, as well as the entire panel. Thank you to all of our panelists for their time and their insights, and of course to Anam and the Kavida team for putting this session together. From AmCham, it's been a privilege and a pleasure to facilitate the Resilient Sri Lanka project, as it were. So thank you, everybody. Have a great evening and good night.